Hey everyone, it's Amy Lynn Durham, and you're listening to Create Magic at Work. Create Magic at Work is on a mission to equip senior leaders with tools they need to be a true quantum leader and actually understand what that means. Improve employee engagement, retain top talent, and transform your workplace culture to have less drama and stress. So let's start making magic. Welcome back to Create Magic at Work. Today, I have decided to re-release a powerful conversation with Dr. Aaron Tabacco on the art of transformational feedback. Within every critique lies the potential for growth or disheartenment. And together, Aaron and I explore how to turn feedback into a catalyst for transformation rather than a blow to the spirit. Join us as we dive into ways to approach feedback as a deeply meaningful exchange that nurtures growth and builds resilient relationships. Also, don't miss the chance to connect live. Join Aaron and me at the Edgewalker Cafe on November 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern for an enriching dialogue on breaking time and quantum presence. You can find the link in the show notes or visit edgewalkers.org to join future cafes, which are held monthly. I hope to see you there in the cafe for Breaking Time Quantum Presence. In the meantime, enjoy this conversation and let's keep creating magic in the workplace. I am so excited today because back by popular demand, I have for you Aaron Tabacco. Aaron was a guest on the Create Magic at Work podcast. He kicked off season 2 for all of us, and his episode is by far the most popular episode of Create Magic at Work history, and it continues to be. When Aaron first joined us in season 2, he brought some really new perspectives to the table on how to be present for each other, for our teams, and how to be present in the workplace. And it was really encouraging that that episode was the most popular because it's like, oh my gosh, leaders and people are exploring this, and this is so amazing. If you missed that episode, we'll drop it in the show notes for you to go back and listen to it. But let me give you a little bit of background on Aaron. Aaron is an executive coach and the director of staff experience in the Department of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. A former professor of developmental pediatrics, Aaron transitioned into his current line of work 3 years ago, becoming a thought leader in the development of holistic workplaces, leadership development, DEI efforts, and internal institutional workforce research. He's a highly skilled public speaker and communicator, having been featured at numerous public and private professional engagements in his areas of specialty. Aaron has several professional publications in the US, Europe, Japan, and online, and is a graduate of the UC Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute at the Berkeley Haas School of Business. Additionally, Aaron has engaged in high-stakes healthcare and higher education conflict mediation for families and professionals over a 13-year period. He's a father of 3 young sons who live in Portland, Oregon. And Aaron also is a dear, dear friend of mine. We'll add that to the bio. Aaron and I connected, gosh, maybe is it getting close to 3 years now, or maybe a little over? When was it?
I do not know, but that's probably right. Something like that.
Yeah,
somewhere in the last few years.
Yeah, we met up. We were both presenting at the UC Berkeley coaching conference, and we met on Zoom before that conference. And it was like we reconnected in this life or something for whatever we were supposed to do with each other in this life. So the connection has been strong. And Aaron, thank you for returning as a guest to the podcast to share your insights on feedback today in the workplace. I mean, this is a critical topic, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on feedback in the workplace. Anything you want to add before we dive into that?
Oh, not at all. I mean, I'm genuinely touched and humbled that these conversations that we have been having seem to really speak to people. This world of presence. It's interesting. We all know that it's almost become cliche that we live in a world that is more connected than ever, and yet we are more isolated and lonely than ever. and really crave deep presence with others. And so it's just a real honor for me to be considered somebody worthy of listening to on the topic. So thanks for inviting me again, Amy. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we discover in our conversation. So I'm all in.
Yeah, already you've hit me with like that paradox of we've never been more connected, yet people feel more isolated and lonely than ever before. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
How can we provide solutions to that? Right?
Yeah.
So, first off, feedback in the workplace. I laugh because it's quite a topic. I've been the recipient of course, of feedback, and I've also been the person delivering it. And I think back to my 20s when I was a regional manager, or my early 30s, and the way I delivered feedback. I don't think that I had the high level skill set or tools that I might have today. So what does constructive feedback look like for you?
Well, I really appreciate that background. I really quickly, I can really resonate with that. I mean, I am 51 years old and have been through numerous career evolutions, like many of us. I, for whatever reason, have always found myself in positions of leadership across my lifespan. I don't ever remember anybody teaching me how to do this. I just remember people saying, "You're it. And so this is part of your job now." And kind of having to feel my way through all of it like the rest of us. So I really resonate with that. I am in a different place right now than where I began. And for me, I think I've come to understand feedback as something I want to approach as a conversation of transformation. I don't even really like to think about it in terms of constructive feedback, because that, for many people, has been kind of a traumatizing experience on the recipient end, and sometimes, on the provider end as well. And so you hear that piece, and it's almost this passive aggressive way to say, I'm going to sit here in judgment with you, but I'll label it constructive, and you'll walk away feeling, that you've been through a destructive experience, destructive rather. And I think, well, what's the whole purpose of these kinds of conversations? And in from a spiritual intelligence perspective, wanting to be a wise and effective change agent for people, what we need out of that interaction is some kind of, transformation, some kind of evolution. And if we can really learn to do this well, it can be transformative for both people involved in the conversation, which is a little mind-blowing, right? But the truth is, as I've honed and developed my own practices with this, that's been my experience. And it's really strange to think of, but when I think about my career, particularly in all of those years, I was a professor of nursing and working with undergraduate students or graduate students, or even mentoring new faculty. Some of the most spiritual experiences I've had as a leader have come from those conversations. So I know it's possible, and my hope is that we can maybe tease out what some of those elements are together.
I mean, you're already taking it next level by removing this constructive feedback framing and helping all of us view it as transformational feedback and tying it into being a wise and effective change agent. If I'm a leader, a lot of the research that I've studied shows that feedback in the workplace is a critical driver for financial outcomes and having a positive organization. I find that fascinating because I'm thinking, well, who's training these individuals to offer feedback in a transformational way to where it will drive financial outcomes and a positive organization? Because a lot of people leave feedback conversations, there's the one-on-ones with your supervisor that happens, or maybe you get an annual review if you're lucky, where they'll itemize some things out, right?
Right.
And I know that the feelings that some people are left with are frustration, resentment, and demotivation.
Mm-hmm.
What are some ways, if a leader feels ill-equipped, that they can step into a transformational space where they leave someone feeling confident, supported, appreciated, engaged, and motivated?
Well, that's such a good question. And it really is tied to the conversation that we really, we had last time, and just how do you develop presence at a very high level. And unsurprisingly, it really begins with self-reflection, right? So it's that entry point into emotional intelligence, right? That precursor to spiritual intelligence. It really is being able to step into oneself, step above oneself, and examine your own experience with the concept of this, or not the concept rather, but the skill of being able to be present and give somebody, insight that they don't have about what's currently happening in their work experience. So if we don't do that, we bring to this a lot of our own woundedness. We bring learned performances, like we bring certain masks. We think we're supposed to give this in a certain way, or et cetera. I guess what I'm saying is just that we approach it from a performance perspective instead of a presence perspective. And, you can't really get into that space of having this be a transformational exchange if you yourself haven't been transformed in your thinking about what's about to happen here, right? And if you're approaching it from the very common paradigms of constructive feedback, et cetera, without questioning kind of the history and the meaning of that for you and others, then you're kind of stepping into it in a place where all you can do is repeat past experiences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that speaks to, for me, like in my language, intention setting ahead of time of how this is going to go. If I'm just saying it, envisioning how this is going to play out in a transformational way where the person I'm interacting with feels supported and appreciated and motivated when they leave the conversation. So then the next question would be, how does that happen if we are a leader offering feedback that, I don't know how to say that, but like that doesn't feel pleasant, that isn't what if we have to have a hard conversation? What if we have to address something that most people would feel uncomfortable with and possibly conflict avoid with it, or shoot out an email or just, sign this paper, you're getting written up and I'll see you later. Or I'm just thinking of like what happens in the workplace, right? Because so how can a leader prepare for that to be transformational?
Well, I mean, there's a reason that many people call this the workplace F word, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's just as a kind of a contextual factor. About 5 years ago, when I first really started showing up in the LinkedIn world and going through a career transition myself, a career evolution, one of the ways I began connecting was just writing and publishing articles on topics like this that I thought, well, leaders might not have the same viewpoint a professor of nursing might have around some of these concepts. And so one of the first articles I wrote was, this article around how to avoid ambiguity and delays in feedback, how to really kind of overcome some of the struggles people have with that. And what was so fascinating to me was, as somebody who'd not really engaged in the LinkedIn world before, I started receiving like direct messages and emails from people that I had never known. They were, some were in my network, but some weren't. And they were sharing these trauma stories around feedback. And it really started to help me realize I tapped into a big nerve for folks. So it really put me on a journey to deconstruct for myself, well, what is the beginning of this? How do you embrace something different than what we've known if, we're trying to work within the parameters of our language. So it occurred to me we had to change the language of it in order to infuse new ideas. And the first one, you're kind of tapping into for me, I'll return to one of my favorites, Auntie Pema. I call her Auntie Pema because she is this wise, amazing thinker and writer. I'm speaking, of course, of Pema Chodron, the American Buddhist nun, who taught me a really important lesson in one of her writings, which was, and I'm going to quote it because I want it to be right. The only reason we don't open our hearts and minds to other people is that they trigger confusion in us that we don't feel brave enough or sane enough to deal with. To the degree we look clearly and compassionately at ourselves, we feel confident and fearless about looking into someone else's eyes. And that really, again, it kind of ties to what I said a minute ago. The journey to do well with making this experience of feedback be transformational for others and maybe for ourselves is to begin that inward journey. And that's one of the things I love about your work in spiritual intelligence with leaders is you bring those tools to the table to help them really look at. And that very first domain is the self-awareness part. What are your values? What's your worldview? How do you see your purpose? Are you aware of the ego, right? Our selfhood and all of its sort of facets. And, you're right. I mean, the reality is that if we sit down and have a conversation and it's potentially, a quote, crucial conversation or a hard conversation in someone's minds, that's probably going to bring up for us as the provider, if we haven't really examined it, we're bringing our own wounds to the table, our own fears, our own traumas. We've probably been the recipient of poorly given feedback as well. And it makes us feel very, very nervous. And we're acting from a place of fear and suffering. Essentially, we're bringing our suffering to the table. And the goal is not to do that. So we can't do it until we really take that inner journey and really kind of become aware of what might come up for us in a conversation. So intention setting, right? You mentioned trying to approach feedback from the intention setting of how can I be of service and help to this individual? And we also have to come into it having set the intention of what might this bring up for me? And how am I going to be present for myself beforehand so that I can set those things aside?
I love that because just what you're speaking to is putting your stuff to the side. It's not about you, right? It's all back to that presence conversation that whatever is going on, it's the low self-orientation. This isn't about you. This is about having a transformational experience for someone that you're showing up for as their leader. And you referenced some skills of spiritual intelligence, which I love. One of the ones that came up for me, and I want to ask this question because we focused a lot on leaders and maybe posed some thoughts to get people thinking, how do I approach this in a transformational way when I'm giving feedback? If I'm giving feedback, hopefully you are, and you're working on your skills with that. How should I be as the person receiving feedback?
Yeah, that's a critical piece as well, right?
Yes. How can me as the receiver stay in a listening present mode rather than switching to defense if it's something that feels uncomfortable?
Right. And in so many ways, I think that's just as equally, if not maybe a more vital part of thinking about transformational feedback is how do I receive it? Because the purveyor of that feedback may not be highly skilled in the areas we're talking about. They may be really skilled at being very blunt, very direct, and very clear, which would actually be really helpful. Because one of the big issues with feedback, often people leave feeling like they haven't heard anything of substance. They've been given these broad swaths of some sort of a personal or moral judgment, but they've received something that's not really actionable. So that could be a challenge. So leaders who actually are at least good at that can be really helpful. But, stepping into a conversation, we don't always know that we're walking into a moment of feedback. So that could be, challenging. But then getting into that sort of emotional intelligence perspective, at the very least, we should develop some skills around, well, should sounds very judgmental. We can develop some skills around being fully present for ourselves in the moment, right? So when we're on the receiving end, that's where we need to be focusing our attention, is what's happening within me emotionally. I don't want to be reactive to this. I want to be open. I want to hear what's coming at me. I want to separate what is self from what is my work. I don't want to receive this as a conversation where I feel like my identity is being attacked. And so how do I parse out what I'm receiving in a healthy way so that I respond to this well, and then can approach it from maybe more of a perspective of curiosity than self-protection? So I think it kind of begins with the inward journey of, what's happening for me in this moment. And can I articulate that to myself and hopefully to the person across the table from me, or sitting beside me, or walking beside me, however this is coming at us. So it may sound like I'm kind of speaking in a circular fashion or only talking about one dimension of this, but that self journey is really the most important one in order to even access the interactional pieces of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The preparation to receive feedback from a place of curiosity, I think, is a great tip just for one thing, one takeaway today that might be helpful, because it is hard to hear feedback if it doesn't feel uplifting or complimentary, right? And you just reminded me of something I heard, or I can't remember where I heard this, and you probably know this more than me, that when we're giving feedback, we absolutely should be focusing on, and help me if you know about this, we should absolutely be focusing on the task at hand. Because you brought up a person feeling attacked with their identity.
Right.
And when you said that, it struck a chord within me. Oh, that's somebody that might not be well versed in providing feedback at a high level for transformational change. Because if the recipient is feeling personally attacked, then the feedback was somehow delivered in a way that the person felt about the person rather than a task at hand at work. Or can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think many, many negative stories of feedback experiences, that's kind of really at the heart of it, is that people are leaving the conversation in some way feeling that their very identity or being or strengths or skills or knowledge, etc., has been attacked, instead of maybe examined or approached from a perspective of curiosity. And I think that it's a little bit different than the feedback needing to feel uplifting per se, or positive. I think one of the areas leaders get into trouble is some of these kind of approaches, like sandwich techniques, where it's like you tell them a good thing and then you tell them the hard thing and then you tell them another good thing. And at some point, they're going to lose people in that conversation as well. It doesn't come across necessarily as genuine or authentic. It also might obscure the message. And people might leave with, well, that one thing wasn't so great, but, I left being told I was fine. So they might leave a conversation and, with the misunderstanding that they're doing well. And in fact, what their leader was trying to commit to them is some clarity around, you are not doing well, but hey, I like you. So it's kind of this messy area, right? And feedback, for it to be really transformational, it has to be really accurate. It has to be really objective. It has to be really clear. For us to receive it, we have to be open to it and understand that we're not being morally judged, but we're being shown areas where our knowledge or our skill is incomplete or only emerging or developing, or maybe it's not developing and we're stuck, right? And the the transformational aspect of having a leader who's so willing to overcome their own fears and anxieties about this, to do that with us, has really done such an incredible service to us, really, and is showing genuine compassion because they're committed. They're showing they're committed to wanting me to be successful. So the curiosity approach of giving and receiving feedback is critical. I think another mental trick that's really helpful, or not trick, but framework, is to frame everything as learning. I don't know why we don't frame everything around giving feedback as a situation of, well, we're learning, like we're in a mode where knowledge or skills or the application of them is somehow incomplete or insufficient to the task, and we have to figure it out together, and a leader operating from a really high sense of spiritual intelligence or high self, can sit and approach it from that perspective to say, here's what we're noticing in this aspect of your work. And it looks like this. Let me be clear. Here's some examples. And I'm really curious. I'd love to learn more about the thinking. What's happening for you when you're in this situation? When before you're behaving in this way or turning out this work product, help me understand your thinking. I'm not aware of it. I mean, many times leaders are also making a lot of assumptions, right? They're not framing this as learning, so there's no curiosity that they're bringing to the table. If that's the case, then they're also projecting a bunch of assumptions and incomplete picture of what's really happening. And that just cuts us off from other people, right? So the trick here is to step into that space where we can begin to co-examine everything and take a learning journey together. I guarantee that if you can do that with somebody and they're willing to be open with you, right, then you will learn new things that will really have challenged your own assumptions as a leader. When we look at behavior as communication and we look at performance as learning, there's just so much grace in learning, right? It's like, oh, I didn't realize you didn't know this thing, or that this skill is challenging for you and you're operating from a place of, emerging ability. How can we strengthen that? I would love to partner with you in that. And then the leader becomes more of a coach and mentor than a judge and jury.
Wow. Just everything you said was just beautiful. And I wish that you were the person giving me feedback in some situations. Thank you for sharing all of that. Gosh, that was amazing, Aaron. Just approaching feedback in a transformational way and approaching situations that we're learning. I mean, talk about wise and effective change agent. Talk about making wise and compassionate decisions from a spiritually intelligent perspective. Very, very beautiful. All right, it's time for a fun, playful, quick break. And it's time for you to discover your spiritual intelligence at work. So over here at Create Magic at Work, we are not just a great podcast. We are an executive coaching firm, a team dedicated to helping leaders like you create healthier, more fulfilling workplaces. Whether it's through private coaching, transformative workshops, or impactful keynotes, we're here to help support your journey to have less drama and stress and more magical moments in your life. So have a little fun. Take our quick quiz in the show notes and see where you stand. Discover your spiritual intelligence at work. Click on the link in the show notes and reach out to us for support if you need it. Sending magic to you.
A very common place that you receive feedback as a nurse is in handoffs in the hospital from one shift to another. And so I noticed very, very early on as a young nurse that in acute care, I would go in, you'd meet outside the patient room, the off-going shift nurse would give you a rundown of the evening, the care, the needs, etc. You may or may not have ever worked with the patient before, so who knows? But it was very, very interesting to me how I would watch nurses and other students, etc., receive report without any question. So you'd hear the nurse say, well, good luck today. I mean, this person's just a terrible patient and they're in a bad mood and throwing things and blah, blah, blah. And, or uncooperative or et cetera. And it was just a really hard night. And so what you would see is from the transactional perspective of this exchange, the oncoming nurse or nursing pair, student, et cetera, immediately receive that story, and that's apparently the truth of the moment. And so it's kind of like this micro feedback situation. Instead of maybe stepping into higher self, receiving that, extending compassion to the nurse who just had a really difficult experience for some reason, and opening curiosity about the behaviors, like stepping into the room to meet this person and create your own relationship with something of an informed blank slate. Something happened that was really rough for that individual or family, et cetera. And rather than just respond as though it's the only truth, are there other dimensions for me to explore? Like what is happening for that person from a compassion perspective that might illuminate me and help me be more present and actually help me uncover what is the underlying need. And so were experiences like that really started helping me think about and view these interactions of feedback and information exchange from more open lenses.
Yeah. Thanks for expanding on that. I think we touched on this a little bit, but I want to go back to it and dive into it a little bit more. We were talking about how the receiver of feedback can stay present and stay curious themselves instead of switching into a defensive mode, especially if someone delivering the feedback may not be fully coming from that space, from a curiosity perspective or from a we're learning together, this is going to be transformational perspective.
Right.
What are your thoughts on, because skill 16 came up for me when I was thinking about this in SQ, and skill 16 is seeking guidance from others, from experts, from your higher self, your inner wisdom, or maybe from a higher power, or seeking guidance from others. One of the questions in the SQ21 is, I internally question the guidance I receive from others to determine the right behavior or course of action to take. And you can rank yourself on, do I internally question the guidance I receive from others? And does that help me determine the right behavior or course of action to take? And I bring this up because we're still learning. We're still in this learning mode of how to give feedback properly. So if I'm on the receiving end, what are some ways that I can check in and seek guidance internally if that feels right?
Well, I think the curiosity piece, right, that you're highlighting, that is actually the skill. It's asking oneself the question, like, okay, so I'm receiving this. Let me pause. And let me look at this maybe holistically. So one, what in the feedback I am receiving is story or judgment? What is factual? What am I hearing versus what am I not hearing? Am I actually seeing and hearing everything being communicated to me? What's happening internally? How might that be questioning, coloring what I'm hearing? Especially if I'm feeling my heart rate go up and my blood pressure go up and I'm panicking, et cetera. How can I calm down and center so I can be more fully present? What might be happening for the other person as well? Like if the feedback is coming to me in a way that feels emotionally charged from their perspective, is it possible for me to hold a space or create a space of compassion and curiosity between us, even if they're not able to do that in this moment? That takes a really high level of self sort of awareness and maybe even self-mastery. But I think that we can get there. It does begin with self-generosity and a willingness to realize that I might get this wrong. But let me try anyway. Let me try to be curious. Let me try to set aside what's happening. Just like you said earlier, for the leader to say, it's not about me. Sometimes as a recipient, we need to recognize, oh, something here is about me because we're having this conversation, but it might not be the delivery part, right? It might be something else is going on. Or I might just be a convenient person in a crosshairs at a moment. I don't really know. There's a lot of things happening here. But if we too, as recipients of feedback, can remind ourselves that all behavior is communication, including how the feedback is being given to us. And if it's communication that we're not quite understanding, then what it behooves us to do is to be curious about that. To say, to be able to step into the moment and say, well, thanks for opening up a conversation with me about this. It seems that there's a lot going on here. It seems that there's a specific thing going on, and I may or may not be clear about it. So if I may, I'd like to ask some questions. But it also seems like this is bringing up something for you, and it's also bringing up something for me. So maybe we can talk about both of those things and start a journey to parse them out a little bit. That's a very mature perspective to take when we're on the receiving end. And it might sound really pie in the sky and really difficult, but it really does come from that practice of self-awareness, right? This Auntie Pema type work of, deep internal journeys, books of hers like The Places That Scare You. I mean, gosh, what a book title.
Mm-hmm.
But, these are those moments, right? These are the moments where we can actually make a choice to show up and choose to be fully present, not only tell the truth without blame or judgment, but receive the truth without blame or judgment, even if it's being presented to us that way. And it's amazing what can happen in our relationships. This is why this is actually transformational feedback work. This isn't basic work, right? This is, I've learned how to have a conversation with someone and say X, Y, and Z, but now I'm really focusing on the human to human aspect, paying attention to heart and meaning, right? Really getting to how can I be present for someone in that space, that's spiritual intelligence.
Yeah.
And, as is telling the truth without blame or judgment, or receiving it without blame or judgment. And being open to outcome and not attached to it, not knowing where this conversation will lead. When you started this last question, it was sort of about this seeking guidance from a higher self, in a moment, and very high level approach to feedback for both, leaders and recipients when we're in those moments is to be able to have the humility to recognize I don't have the answer going into this. And I need your partnership to figure it out. For a leader to look and say, I have to say, I'm going to give you some feedback and I want to be here to support you, but I don't know where we might go today with it. I'm not sure what the needs are. And I'm not even sure if I have the answers to some of the questions you may ask. But I'm fully here with you about this, and let's go. It's pretty, I think, evolved presence.
Yes. Love it. Gosh, this is so powerful, Aaron. I'm loving this conversation. And the call for the recipient to step into their power, really, in the situation. I mean, that's empowering, because usually when there's this power dynamic of the leader offering feedback to an individual where they might be their supervisor, then I think that creates some sort of, a victimization type mentality also. And the call for that individual to rise up and empower themselves in the situation, to bring presence, to bring curiosity, to tap into higher self. Does this sit right with me? Is there something else going on here that I can understand? What are the takeaways that I can maybe take or glean from that to make myself grow and learn, even though it might not have been delivered in the best way? That's a call for both sides. I just keep picturing, this bridge, and both one person on one side and the other person on the other, and they both meet in the middle. It's not the leader walks all the way over to the other side of the bridge. So thank you for expanding on that. And I think you've offered some really great, I'm just going to call them like talk tracks that people can sort of take and make their own and practice when they step into these moments. When you're someone that has not received feedback, we talk about feedback. There's all this data that Gen Z loves feedback. You have to give Gen Z all this feedback in the workplace, and all this data about how amazing it is for organizations when done correctly. What if somebody is listening right now like, I don't even get any feedback? Should I ask for feedback?
Right. Yeah, I think I really appreciate that curiosity aspect of our Gen Z colleagues, really wanting clarity. Like that's courageous to step into a space and saying, "Help me see how I'm doing." This that's a space of setting aside self and in wanting to be a very pretty high level practitioner of self reflection, which is the key to development, right? I mean, being a really self-reflective person, it is the way to change your linear growth and progress to exponential growth and progress. So I just embrace that. I think, having that curiosity and being courageous enough to bring it forward. I just posted about that on LinkedIn recently, right? That from another podcast I was interviewed, asked about courage. What is it? Well, it's the ability to apply curiosity, when you're faced with some sort of resistance, and soliciting that, asking for it is pretty gutsy. So
I
I
mean,
love
I,
that.
I I love it. I think they're calling us out on avoiding difficult us, meaning I'm a Gen Xer.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that's why I say
We
they're
share
calling us
that.
out. Yeah. So I'm like, oh, let's do this. Yeah, I'm glad. And they want face-to-face conversation, video chat, text. They don't, from the data I've seen, there's not a lot of love for emails coming
Right.
through that are offering those types of things. So I am so encouraged by it. And I have to bring this up. There's this joke on Instagram that I see all the time, like the workplace humor. I love that stuff. And one of them is always joking about how your boss messages you saying, hey, can you hop on a quick call? Can you hop on a
Mm-hmm.
quick call? And then the anxiety that comes from getting this, message, hey, can you hop on a quick call? Why don't we hop on a quick call? So I'm bringing that up to you because I want to hear what we can, I want to continue this Gen Z conversation, but I also want to hear, is there a better way? Like if I'm reaching out to maybe one of my Gen Z team members, is there a better way I can approach having a conversation than something like that?
Well, I think if we can meet people in that space of curiosity, it's a good starting place. Oh, so when someone's coming to us and soliciting feedback, tell me how I'm doing. I mean, my thought as a leader is always, I'd love to have this conversation with you. What brings you to ask? Tell me, what's going on for you. What are you thinking about? What's coming up for you? Or do you have some concerns, et cetera? Like what's the context of the conversation? Help me understand what your need is. And then kind of get into some deeper spaces with people. It's like, well, I've been doing this, but I'm not really getting any feedback, or I don't feel like I've been told what I'm doing. And obviously I want to do well here. So tell me, is everything going okay? We have been now in a multi-generation situation where communication about our work is by exception. It's been limited historically to when something's not working. And sadly, it's also been delayed because of the things we're talking about. A leader feels overwhelmed, they feel afraid, they're anxious, they don't want to give it. Then it's when it's incomplete or it's ambiguous. So if the only context for how am I doing with a person, regardless of their generation, who's more relational than transactional, then I need to think about feedback as an ongoing conversation about the work. and really take opportunities to point out just as equally when the work is going well. This is different than this, everybody participation trophy thing that is so, inflammatory, these discussions about that generational aspect of communication in society. I don't even want to go into that. But to sit down with somebody regularly, connect as another human being, especially as a supervisor, and say, let's talk about the work and how it's going for you. Those two things you've parsed out right away. You're going to focus on their learning about the work they're doing, the skills they're applying, their knowledge, etc., what's working, what needs work for them, and also separating out who they are as a person, their journey with the work, wherein just by doing that, you start to parse out, like these feelings of judgment and set those things aside. But to really set that out proactively, talk with people, get engaged with what's working for them, in their work and how it's going, and then open up spaces for what needs work, what's not feeling as easy, what's feeling uncomfortable, where are you conflicted, or where do you feel like you're spending a lot of unnecessary time, because maybe there's a knowledge gap or a skills gap, et cetera. And it's approaching that from a different perspective, right? It's really approaching that from a human-centered perspective rather than a transaction. And I think that's the key here, right? Is I think that what you pointed out in using our Gen Z colleagues as an example is the need to be relational. And many of us from different generations, a little bit farther ahead, we were socialized into a workplace that was transactional. And so we're being called to higher self as well. And I just don't see that there's anything but benefit to come from that.
I totally agree. Yeah, totally agree. I love it. Yeah, thank you. Well, Aaron, thank you for showing up for all of the Create Magic It listeners today and really offering your insights. Aaron, what would your offer invitation be to everyone listening based off this topic?
Well, I think anyone who's clicked on this because they're interested in the topic is probably my kind of people. So the invitations I would offer, of course, one, engage more deeply with your work, Amy, because I feel like the spiritual intelligence model is really, really transformative. That is a part of being able to be in a transformative relationship with someone else. To engage in transformational feedback is to begin a journey of self-transformation. So I think that's really positive. I take a very Adam Grant approach to the world. And so if people listening in are interested in connecting with me, right now I tend to do that pretty exclusively on LinkedIn, but I have a website coming as well. It's currently in development, so people can maybe more outside of the public purview of LinkedIn, reach out to me more directly. And then this has just been a topic that has come up so many times across my career that I'm very close to launching a course literally called Transformational Feedback. It will be online. It will be a static course, so people can do the learning at their own pace, et cetera. It won't be a live course, but I'm really going to take this and approach it the same way I would approach an undergraduate course in nursing communications, and really be substantive and point out like the concepts that are needed, the questions people can be asking in terms of a self-reflective practice model, the kinds of what the skills really are, breaking those down for people and giving you ways to practice so that it does feel like you're moving yourself forward. I just see such a need for this. I mean, for me, this is quantum leadership. Right. So that developmental aspect of spiritual intelligence you talk about, the quantum leader, how can you take this skill set that you may have or this viewpoint of compassion and wisdom and try to multiply that out further? So for me, this is one of my altruistic efforts, is to try and bring that forward for folks. So I would say those will be some of the pieces that I'm offering for folks who want to go farther.
I want to thank each and every one of you for coming back every week to listen to a new episode of Create Magic at Work and really helping to support and advocate for healthy leaders, workplaces, and lives for all of us. If you want any information on how to connect with me, click on the link in the show notes. You'll get access to all of the social media links for Create Magic at Work. Stay following along for more amazing episodes where we help you improve productivity and profitability in the workplace and decrease stress. Sending magic to everyone, and see you next time.